In roller derby, holding space is an empowering, often intimidating act of strength and strategy for oneself and/or teammates. Holding Space, the podcast, clears the floor for conversations that touch upon race, class, identity, and privilege to amplify stories, build community, and make more connections in the skate world. Expect lots of smart, dope skate people musing about life on and off 8 wheels and silliness. Can't forget the silliness that you never knew you needed and won't be able to live without. This is Holding Space with Magical Realism. Welcome. What's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Holding Space with Magical Realism. Today's episode is lit. We're talking books. The skater and announcer Rosetta Stone of Sacramento roller derby shares her favorite books of 2019 and talks about what it's like to have Aspergers and play roller derby. But first, we have Punk of Arizona roller derby joining us to talk about self-publishing her first book last fall. The poetry memoir, The Afterlife, explores grief after the loss of a loved one. She recounts how roller derby aided in her healing and writing, reads a poem for us, and much, much more. Take it away, Punk.
I skate with Arizona roller derby. I spent this last year as secretary of the league, and I was added to our charter for the All-Stars this year and spent most of the year skating with our B team, Rising. And I also skate for the home team, Midnight Storm. Woo! And then I also have my artist persona, stage name, pen name. That is Lexi Lockett, and I've been using that stage name for 10 years. I started just as a musician, playing shows around town and music that I've written, been in bands, and then I started recently doing poetry, and I released a book this year and released it under that name. And then my muggle name day to day is Alexis.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, I guess I'll let you choose. What do you want to start talking about first? Do you want to talk about your book of poetry, your derby and skating history? You choose.
I'll start with the book, but it kind of weaves into derby.
Sweet.
So it'll just kind of hopefully naturally flow.
Dope.
I wrote a book titled The Afterlife, and it's kind of like a poetry memoir of my grief/healing process after my first major loss. Oh, I do want to give some trigger warnings for this. The content of this book, it is about suicide loss. I'll be talking about that throughout, but I'm not going to be graphic or anything. I'm just mostly focusing on my position as a survivor of suicide loss. And the person that I lost was my boyfriend, and I was the one who found him and called 911 and went through that whole process. So it was a really hard time in my life, really fucked up time in my life, and I have post-traumatic stress disorder from that. And deal with depression and anxiety every day and stuff. This year was the 5th anniversary of his passing, and I started writing the book last year, and I released it this year on the anniversary, November 5th.
Thank you for that. How did you decide to release this as a memoir? Did that come first or later, or what? How did that work out?
I kind of started writing a book on accident because I was just trying to process my experience, and I feel like I have grown over the last 5 years for sure, from when it happened to where I'm at now. And so just kind of chronicling that, and I have a lot of memory issues from my PTSD, and so a lot of the events that happened that night I blacked out, and I always kind of wondered about what really happened, or yearned for the who was I. I couldn't really pinpoint all the ways that I changed, and I was trying to find answers in there, I guess. And so for a while there, I was contemplating requesting a copy of the police report, and I talked with my counselor about it. I talked with some of my friends who have experience in law enforcement, and everyone was like, "Ooh, probably don't do that." because it's just, it's hard to see information presented in that way because it's very stark and factual. And this was a person that I loved. So I was like, okay, that's fine. Maybe I'll write about it. And I've always been into poetry, and I've written songs since I was a teenager. And so I just kind of started writing what I could remember, and then it developed from there. And I'm a really big fan of the YouTube channel Button Poetry. And every year they do a chapbook contest, which is a chapbook book is kind of like a poetry novella. It's a short book, usually around like 30 to 40 poems. And so it's a way to get new authors exposure. And so I had started writing, and then I was like, wow, I think this is going to be like something. And then I remembered that Button Poetry has a contest. And so I decided to like set that as a goal to finish and submit to the contest. I didn't win, but it was worth it.
Absolutely. Sometimes it takes some time between finishing a draft and going back to reread it and editing. What was that like for you?
Man, that was a wild ride. I think so. When I finished like writing the collection, I had 32 poems, I think. And for the contest that I was entering, you could only submit 30. And there was like a page limit and stuff. So I had like those combined. And I mean, the writing process was really exhausting. So like I definitely had to take a break to just kind of let it sit before I went back to it, because it was just like reopening a wound in a way, but like trying to come at it from a healthy angle. So I did a few editing passes myself. And then I actually have a friend that I went to high school with who studied English in college and is like getting their PhD. And I was like, hey, would you have time to edit a poetry book for me? And they agreed. So we went back and forth like 3 or 4 times. And I was like so grateful for them because I had like so many qualms about like asking someone to take on the emotional aspect of just like reading it. Because I still like was kind of going back and forth on whether or not I actually wanted to publish it sometimes. But yeah.
It has like this sort of conversational tone and sort of like informative aspect to it. So I'm guessing now that you're telling me this, that it was like you sort of conversing with yourself usually. Is that who you envisioned when you were writing this? Or and then bringing someone else into that process must be really, I don't know, scary.
It was scary. The ironic thing is that I have been involved in like mental health awareness and suicide prevention since I was a teenager. I've been really active in the nonprofit To Write Love on Her Arms. And like when I was in college, I started like my university's like U chapter for them, which was just like a club on campus, and do like awareness events and benefit shows and stuff. So like I already had a lot of language to talk about suicide before I became a survivor of suicide, which is a really weird space to be in. And so a lot of To Write Love on Her Arms, like outreach originally was through blogs and through storytelling. And like, so the founder of that organization, Jamie Twarkowski, is like someone who is very influential in my writing. And he definitely has that like conversational style.
Who else are your, would I say, mentors or heroes in poetry, or, other poets that you look up to, or the writers that you look up to?
I actually had like the coolest experiences with one of my favorite poets recently. Their name is Andrea Gibson. They're this like wonderful queer poet and activist, and they write some of the most like tender love poems, but then like all of these like great political pieces and like think pieces and call to actions. And it's so beautiful because like all of their love poems are very queer, and it's just like, oh, I love it so much. But they also write a lot about their mental health, and they've attempted suicide in the past and have like gone to therapy for years and stuff, and are very frank and open about that in their poetry. And they were actually kind of my gateway into finding the Button Poetry channel that I was talking about. And so the week that I was releasing my book, Andrea Gibson was doing a show in Phoenix, and I was like, oh my God, we have to go. So me and my best friend and my girlfriend went together, and I had just gotten the proof of my book, but I hadn't gotten the copies for like the show that I was doing. But I had 2 proof copies. So I brought one with me to the show, and we were like at the show, we're literally front row, center stage. Like I could touch the stage. We got nachos and we're like using the stage as our table for the show. It was amazing. I was like weeping, and I was just like, I'm having so much fun. And so we waited in line to meet them. And when we got to the front, they were like, oh, front row people. And they were like, I was so comforted that you were eating. It just like made everything seem so chill. And I was
That's
like, oh,
awesome.
God. And then I got to like ramble at them for a moment just about like how much I love their poetry and how much it influenced me and helped me through hard times. And I gifted them a copy of my book. And then they asked me to sign it. And I was like, what? It was like the most beautiful moment. And like I actually had them write something for me got a quote of theirs tattooed on my body that week too.
Wow.
It was the whole thing.
What's the reception been like for your book?
Everyone has been like so kind. And I feel like, I mean, it's mostly people that I know that have been reading it or like I'm able to get such personal feedback. And I think a lot of the reason that I wanted to write this was just to help other people remember that they're not alone, because grief is so isolating. And that's what like people have been saying, which is like, cool, I did it. And like, I have a friend who said he wanted to like gift a copy to a friend of his who was like dealing with a similar thing. And yeah, that was really the goal.
Weave Derby into this for me. Like, how has Derby woven itself into your poetry, or your poetry into Derby?
Yeah, well, it's mostly just about the story. Like, I started skating about 6 months after my boyfriend passed. I was just like really, really, really depressed. I was still in grad school at the time, and my professors knew what was going on, and they were very gracious and lenient about attendance as long as I like turned things in, because I just like was so fatigued and traumatized. And I like just kind of like reached a breaking point where I was just like, I need to do something. I cannot keep just like being a zombie. I like have to get out of bed and do something. And so I kind of dabbled with a lot of random things. I have some friends that do like sideshow and circus stuff. So I took some like aerial silk classes, which was like fun, but like not really, like I was like really bad at it. I would do like weird like performance art nights, just kind of those I mostly like watched and was like, no, I don't want to do that. And then I happened to see a Facebook event for new skater orientation for Arizona roller derby. And I was like, oh my God, it's like Whip It. And I almost joined derby when I was in college and undergrad. I got like a flyer for it, and it was right after the movie came out, and I was obsessed with that movie. I got to see like an early screening of it and have like a t-shirt for it, but I couldn't join in college because I was just like an overachiever and taking too many classes, and like I was the president of a club and had 2 jobs, and I was just like, I can't do anything else. So I kind of forgot about it for years. And then I'm like the most depressed I've ever been in my life, and I see a Facebook event that's like new skater orientation, and I look up the place. It's like 12 minutes from my house, and I was like, all right, let's see what this is. And I'd never even seen about. I didn't know anything about derby except for what I knew from Whip It.
Whip It. The documentary that is Whip It.
Yeah. And I did the orientation, and pardon my French, or as we lovingly call her, Frenchie, who's like the matriarch of our league, is there, and she's just like talking about how amazing roller derby is and like how empowered she has been from it and the family she found. And I was like, all right, I'm in. And so I had like 2 weeks to buy all of my gear and like get my shit ready for practice. And I joined derby in Arizona in June in a warehouse. And like, man, it was the sweatiest I'd ever been.
Had you ever skated before?
I had roller skated as a child. And then when I was like a youth, I was very into the movie Brink.
I don't think I've ever heard of it.
Oh my God. It's just like, it's one of the like Disney Channel original movies, but it's about like competitive inline skating. And I just like had a crush on the main boy in the movie. So I made my parents I asked my parents to like get me rollerblades instead of skates. And then me and my sister would like go to the park by our house and like try and learn tricks.
This is amazing.
Yeah. But it had been like years since I had seriously skated. I think the last time I would have skated would have been like in high school for like a youth group Sunday where we went to Skateland or something. And I just like dove right in.
How big is AZRD?
We're pretty big. I think we have about 150 active members. Our league is broken into like 3 tiers, and then we also have our juniors program. But on the adult side, there's the new skaters. We call them smashers. So that's when you're learning how to skate, learning the rules, and you're not drafted onto a team yet. And then once you're eligible to bout, there's 3 levels you can skate at. There's our city teams, which are like our home teams that stay in the like greater Phoenix area. And we have 2 of those. And then we have 4 state teams who compete against our other leagues in Arizona. And there's like a state tournament at the end of the year. And then we have our national teams, an A and B team.
That's pretty big.
Yeah. And I had like no
dope.
idea what I was getting into. None at all.
Really? Is there a scene? Is there like a lot of like love for roller skating or roller derby in Phoenix?
There's a lot of roller derby in Arizona. AZRD is actually like the second oldest flat track league in the world. And we were like one of the founding WFTDA members. We just finished our 16th season.
That's great.
But like just in the Phoenix area, there's AZRD. There's the Bank Track League that is about as big as us. That is the Derby Dames, Arizona Derby Dames. And then there's like, we have USARS leagues. We have just so many, I can't even count. And that's just in Phoenix. And then Tucson, Arizona has a league, Tucson Roller Derby. There's Flagstaff's league is high altitude roller derby, and Prescott league is Northern Arizona roller derby. And then there's also Yuma has a league, which is Border City roller derby or roller girls, and then Casa Grande roller derby.
Wow.
So there's so much.
Yeah. Are y'all are close enough that you're able to like drive and compete and bout?
Yeah, I think the biggest distance between leagues is from Tucson to Flagstaff, which is like 4.5 hours.
That's not bad.
Yeah. And I mean, I might be wrong because I don't think I've actually traveled to everyone yet, but yeah, it's usually anywhere from like 2 to 4 hours you can compete. And we try and like do like double headers, so like efficient use of people's time and stuff. And then at the end of the year, one of the leagues will host.
And so this is your first year on the charter, yeah?
Yeah.
How was that?
Oh my goodness, it was so wild. Yeah, I got on the charter at the beginning of the season, but like I jam. So it was just kind of like, we're going to try and get you some reps at some point and like just like put a toe in the water. And I was like, I'm so excited. Okay. Because this was my 4th season. So I just like was not anticipating like any of this really happening so fast, I guess. So last year I skated on our B team, Arizona Rising, for the whole year as a primary jammer. And so this year I did crossover. So I was on the charter. So sometimes I would train with the charter at practice. Most of our practices are mixed, but then would skate in the like at tournaments with Rising, which was really fun. And most of our tournaments we traveled to together. So it was nice because I could just like be there and like watching and studying.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I ended up getting to, I played in 4 charter games this year, which was so cool. And we ended up doing like after the playoff invitations, we did Angel City hosted us and Arch Rival, and we had like a mini like round robin kind of thing. So those were my first 2 charter games. I had like 3 jams in each game maybe, but I was like, I got out of the pack and like scored points. I know I scored points at playoffs when I played. I did score points against Arch Rival, and that was like the most wild thing. But yeah. And then I got a couple reps in our playoff games against Denver and London, which was like so surreal. The like second jam I was out, I was jamming against Scald Eagle, and I was just like, what? Playoffs were in Seattle, and that's where my mom and her parents live, and she moved up there to help caretake for her parents. So it's been recent, and so she got to come to the tournament and like see me skate, and it was so cool. And like the first jam I was out against Denver, thank God I had a power jam, and they like trusted me, and I was like, all right, all you have to do is get out, it's cool. And my team,
all you have to do is get out, no big deal against Acres. And like
I trusted my blockers, they did great offense, and I got out, and I think I scored like 6 points in that jam.
Hell yeah. Look at you doing the thing.
Yeah, and I was like, I can't believe that happened. I swear, like,
I'm not ready for this charter, because if anyone would be like, all you have to do is get out against Denver, I'd be like, I'd faint. I'd be like, okay, maybe not me. Whoa.
Because I just kind of happened into Derby, I'm actually like really uneducated about who my skaters are. I've just been learning on the fly.
So you're like, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, what's happening?
That's probably for the best.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm trying to get out of the habit of having jamnesia where I just like black out or like couldn't tell you anything that happens after the jam. But that's still a thing that happens for me. And so half the time I'm just like, I don't even know. I know where my color is. I know where I need to go. And that's all I'm focused on.
That's probably for the best.
I want to be better about like keeping track of my points and stuff in the middle of the jam and things like that. And I have a hard time with that currently.
Okay. Well, that's smart. That's why I can see that. What do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned?
Oh, wow. Man, it's been like such a wild year in so many ways. I think the biggest thing that I'm trying to to work on is like just keep moving forward and like, but also maintaining balance. So like allowing myself to really feel whatever I'm feeling, whether it's happy or sad or anywhere on the spectrum, but then like being like, okay, cool. Like what's the next move? Like what's the action point from here? Cause I'm like a super emotional person and I can just like get stuck in the emotionality of things. So,
what are your methods to get you out of those spaces?
I go to a lot of therapy.
That's good.
I love it.
And you're a therapist yourself, aren't you?
I'm a music therapist. So yeah, I work at an inpatient and rehab and psychiatric hospital, all adults, and I do process groups, just kind of processing through people's like whatever crisis they're going through or the reason that they're trying to get sober and stuff, and like work on finding like coping skills and stuff.
Well, how do you integrate music into that? Like, what are some of the methods that you use?
Sometimes it's like using music as like the starting point for like a conversation. So we'll like listen to a specific song and then like talk about how they relate to it or inspires them and the lessons that we can learn from it. Sometimes we'll like actually like do creative activities, do like songwriting or like kind of like song parody. So we'll, like take the skeleton of the song, but then they'll like change it to be about their experience and things like that.
You know, in those kind of like human, like therapeutic fields and professions, the risk of burnout is so high. What do you do to treat and protect yourself from that?
Roller derby.
Okay.
I have to set like really strong boundaries with myself to like not work like too much overtime and like to really check in with myself like energetically on like what types of groups I'm able to hold space for and things like that. I'm finding I like a lot of structure. So I try and like really plan out my week, and so I can like plan how much energy I have to give where, or like physically or mentally, spiritually, emotionally, whatever it may be. So yeah, that's kind of how I've learned to adapt. And plus I like just do so many things to make sure that I can get to all of it. I just have to be really organized. I still have like a paper planner.
In like preparation for our conversation today, I was trying to like think about the ways that poetry and derby, I don't know, parallel each other. I don't write poetry, but I feel like there's something to how in being a jammer and jamming, like, and poetry, you have to be so deliberate and so quick and so precise with your movements that it kind of like reminded me of that. Like it feels, does that make like sense? Like, I feel like if
I grew up in derby watching Loose Chaos Jam, and if that is not poetry, I don't know what is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. She is like Luce's visual poetry.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And maybe like an I'm up bias more like prose. Like I just, you know what I mean? Like the strength and language and words but also the fluidity. Is there any way that while you were writing this, derby seeped into your writing, you think, or vice versa, any way that your writing has seeped into your derby?
I have actually started writing a love poem to roller derby, but I haven't finished it yet. Yeah, but I think honestly my teammates were a lot of my like beta testers. I'd be like, how does this sound like after practice? We'll like, you know, hang out in the parking lot, catch up for a bit, and I'll just like ramble and be like, what do you think of this? And I'm like, oh, okay. Or like, help me like switch words around and things.
I love that. I asked about the different segments that I might ask you about. And so one of them was called That's My Jam. And it's a segment in which you describe a memorable jam for you. And ideally it would be something or in about that's like YouTubeable or something.
Cool.
Do you have one? Are you ready?
Yeah, it's actually from playoffs, the Denver game.
Yes.
So I don't think they're on YouTube yet, but they should be soon, and I can't wait because I want to watch them. So it was the second jam that I was out. I was basically like a relief jammer, and we run a 4-jammer rotation. So I went in like 2 or 3 times each half, I think. I blacked out. I don't know. But it was the second jam that I was in, and it was when I was jamming against Scald Eagle. And I'm like, okay, well, I did this once and I scored points, so it'll be fine. It doesn't matter that I'm jamming against Scald Eagle right now. I was really trying to like turn up the chill. That's like a thing that me and my teammates like to say to each other when we get too hype. It's like, I just need you to turn up the chill a little.
I love that.
Yeah. So I was really trying to do that. And the jam starts. Skull gets lead. I was like, cool, I know what to do. I'm going to take off the star. I passed it. And I think I passed it to Decker, but that might have been a different jam. But anyway, so I get with the rest of the blockers and I was like, cool, I am not a primary blocker. I'm about to have to block Scald Eagle. This is fine and normal. And we get set up and Denver is like getting their O set up and Scald is coming around the turn. And I see her look at me and I was like, she's going to hit me because she knows that I just passed the star and I'm not a primary blocker. And that's a smart thing to do. So I brace myself. I like say my goodbyes.
You know what I keep imagining, like as you're talking, you know, like in the movies when they go like, freeze frame. Like, you might be wondering how I got in this position.
Yes. And I was like, well, if this is how it ends, this is a pretty good way to go. And Skull comes up and she hits me and like I stumble a little bit, but I don't fall. And I like don't stop her, but I like slow her for like half a second, like a tenth of a second. But it's enough so that my teammates can reform in front of her. So I'm like, cool. Haven't fucked this up yet. And I'm able to like reform. And there was like a solid few seconds where Chocolate and I were walking Skull Eagle together. And I was like, I cannot believe this is happening. And yeah, it was a magical moment. I don't remember how that jam ended, but I remember that. And like I watched it on film, I think, and it was like so quick, but it was like I have such a detailed memory of those moments.
Wow. Congrats. That's quite a feat. Do you have any advice for someone who is contemplating publishing their own book?
I say do it. Like I have a true love for like storytelling in any form. And the beauty of storytelling is that like nobody's going to tell the same story the same way because everybody has their perspectives and their life experiences that all led up to how they experience life and then communicate that to others. So I feel like the more we're able to like have access to each other's stories and like be able to, even though you're like reading, it's still like a community building thing where it's just you're expanding your worldview, expanding your understanding of the world and of other people. And I think everybody's story is important. So publish that book.
Heck yeah. Is there anything you wish someone had told you about Derby or some advice that you can impart about Derby to someone?
Oh, I don't know that I wish that I had someone had told me anything because it's been like the best surprise. I had no idea going in that I would find so much love for the sport. I've never been athletic. I mean, I played basketball in middle school, but then I stopped growing and I'm 5'3", so I was like, this is not fun anymore. And I like really dove into my artistic side for a really, really long time until basically I started Derby 4.5 years ago. But I think for people that are joining or maybe new skaters, it would just be to, define your Derby journey for yourself. Like whatever position you want to play or how the level that you want to play at, like, yes, it's a team sport, but you're an individual and you're investing your time and your money and your body to this really intense thing. So like make it what you want it to be.
Is there anything that you love most about Derby?
I really love jamming. Like I love it so much. And I know like it's like such a popular thing, it seems, for people to be like, oh, I hate jamming, I never jam. And I'm just like, I will take the star every time. Like,
what is it about it?
I don't care. I like get into like such a zen space where it's just like, I try to describe it as like, you're in like a spy movie and there's a car chase and the car is really high tech and they're like, it shows them like weaving in and out of traffic and they're like pressing buttons and like they're like so calm the whole time though. And that's how I feel when I'm jamming.
That's so cool.
I have all these like little mantras that my teammates and I will like write on Sharpie on our bodies for each other. And so I have like my mantras and most of them are from songs that I'll use to like keep myself focused. But like this year has been like, I think by the end of this year, I've played Derby against 5 different countries in the last 2 years and like so many different states I don't even know, and against people that are just Derby legends, Derby heroes in charter games and that RollerCon and stuff.
Do you have a preferred self-care tip?
Yeah, I think the important part of self-care is to do the practical things. I love that self-care is something that is like talked about as like a buzz topic is a word that people are starting to recognize, but I have a hard time with the commercialization of it, where it's just like, oh, self-care and taking a bubble bath. Don't get me wrong, I love a good bath, but my self-care is like making sure I like get my chores done and like have healthy food for the week and have rest. I'm really bad about giving myself time to rest. And so like I have to like hibernate like sometimes where I'm just like, okay, today my phone is going off. I'm not really going to leave the house unless I want to, or if it's like a chore that I need to get done. I have to be kind of strict with that, which like means sometimes I have to like say no to like people that I want to see or like things that I want to do, because in the long run, it just like will like mess up my energy level so much and I'll get behind in everything else. Yeah. Just like listen to your body, give yourself a little grace.
Is there anything you want to hold space for? Be it an issue, a cause, something that you want to inform the community about?
Yeah. So like, since I've done a lot of like suicide prevention has been a lot of stuff that's a part of my life. So in addition, like I still support Troy Love in Her Arms. I also do some of like American Foundation for Suicide Prevention walks and stuff. And I think something that kind of applies to roller derby community is just the way that we use language and how that informs perceptions and stigma surrounding mental health and suicide awareness. And I have such a hard time because I know that like derby started as like a counterculture kind of thing. So a lot of leagues, it was like common to have like the trackside seating be like suicide seats and things like that. And I didn't really have any idea until I was like thrown in, and then I was, oh wow, I really, really, really hate this. So I've been like really trying to gently encourage people to consider like their language around that. Like we used to do like, there's a popular like French drill, people that play basketball, or that's the first time I heard it, we'll call suicides, because like you're supposed to run so many times you want to die. It's like horrible. I like learned this as a child, and then
yikes. Yeah, I had totally forgotten about that until you mentioned it again. But yuck. I can't believe the way that we kind of normalize these topics, you know. And
so we actually used to do that drill, we still do that drill. We used to call it that. And I kind of didn't know what to do. And so I ended up just kind of pulling my coach aside after a practice, because I just had reached a point where I was like, I cannot keep doing this drill. And like, it's just horrible. And I was like, hey, can we maybe try and call that drill anything else? Because I personally am a survivor of suicide loss, and I know I'm not the only person in this league because other people have told me. And it's just like an important mental health issue and not something I think we should trivialize.
absolutely.
And the coaching staff was very receptive to that. It immediately changed, trickled down to all of the levels, all the practices throughout the week. And I was very encouraged by that.
Good. In our, you and I talked beforehand, you'd also mentioned like the term derby widows. Like
yeah.
Could you extrapolate a little on that too?
For sure. I wrote a poem. There's a poem in my book about how I struggle with like, because there's not a language for losing a partner that you're not married to. My boyfriend and I were not married when he died. I, in the technical sense of the word, am not a widow, but like, that's kind of what it feels like. But I, out of respect for people who like made that commitment to others, were like legally or spiritually, whatever worked for them, married, I don't tend to call myself that. I think the first time I heard the phrase derby widow was my first roller con, maybe. They do like a meetup for the spouses that come. And it seems so callous, because I just like thought about how painful my experience it was and how magnified it must be when you're married to someone, and like and then like somehow derby widow is just a funny kitschy thing because you miss your partner while they're at practice.
Right. Callous is the perfect term for it. I can't even, like, now that we're talking about it and thinking about it, I can't believe how like these really painful concepts kind of just seep into our language and get trivialized. Yeah. It's so strange.
It's just like you don't know until you know.
Absolutely.
And then once you know, there's no way to take it back.
Last but not least, do you have an MVP?
That's my mama. My mom is so cool. Everyone like knows her as Mama Punk. She's just like the most supportive, kind, loving person. She like comes to all of my games. And then ever since she moved, she'll like text me every game day, let's go Punk. And like, I got her a shirt that has, for my home team, that has my name or has my number and it says Mama Punk punk on it. She like wore that to playoffs. She's just always been so supportive and encouraging, so good about, I'm one of four. So like, and me and all of my siblings are very different. And she like does such a good job of letting just like all of us like be ourselves. And it's wonderful.
Mama Punk, you are the MVP. Okay. And so are you still up for reading a poem?
I'll just do one because I feel like it sums things up pretty well.
Sweet. Okay.
This is from my book. It's titled Question. Of all of the what ifs, all of the questions, the one I keep coming back to is, what is it like to live without mental illness? To exist in a world where your brain is on your side. The more I reflect on these questions, the more it seems like there isn't anyone that could truthfully answer it. We all have something in our past that we carry with us that created a stark contrast between a before and an after. What if we shined a light on this darkness? What if we were able to talk about it? What if we destroyed the phrase, I'm fine, allowing honest answers to the question, how are you? How are you? I'm struggling. How are you? I can't get out of bed. How are you? The anxiety is eating me alive. How are you? I'd rather be dead. As much as I'd love to imagine a reality without mental illness, the more important question to me now are, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to help each other? What can we do to create an environment where people talk about mental health before hospital stays and before obituaries? How can we challenge our culture to value health over productivity? How many afters will be created before enough is enough? The end.
Thank you overall for sharing this with us, for doing this for yourself and, creating a text for yourself, but also deciding to put it together and share it with the world. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me talk about it. So yeah, I'm gonna do some plugs now.
Dope, do it.
Yeah, but the book is called The Afterlife and released under Lexi Lockett. It is available on Amazon, and then I have an poetry Instagram where I just like kind of post first drafts and like updates about shows and things, and that's Poetry with Lexi, and it's Lexi, how I spell Lexi.
We met at RollerCon, right?
Yeah, we met at RollerCon this year at the announcing booth.
That is true. You took me under your wing as the skilled announcer that you are and showed me all your ways. And then we promptly followed each other on social media and have kept it up ever since.
Totally.
Why don't you kick us off with giving us your derby background and how long you've been skating and what you do and all of the good stuff?
Okay. Well, I'm Rosetta Stone, and I started in 2015 with the league formerly known as Sac City Rollers, because Sacramento had two leagues. Now we're just Sacramento Roller Derby. So I didn't really have any skating experience. I jumped in on we called it Rec League, but like the newbie class, Derby 101. I've been skating since. I am much better than when I started. I was kind of a slow learner, so I took up announcing probably within the same year that I started skating, just because it was like, it's going to be a while before I really get to play, but I want to be able to do something. And we had like a holiday tournament, and they said they needed announcers, so I thought, yeah, let's do it. So right now I'm a skater. I'm the head announcer at Sacramento Roller Derby, which just means I put people on the schedule for our games, and I try to create training opportunities for people to learn. What else do I do? I don't know. I feel like I do a little bit of everything, but oh yeah, I'm coaching now too. I coach our newbies and anyone who's interested in hearing what I have to say, I guess. So let's see, that's how I came to roller derby also, right?
Yeah. How did you come to roller derby? How did you hear about it?
One of my friend Kira, probably back in 2012, did the newbie program at Rap City and told me all about it. And that got me really interested. But it was a few years before I felt like I was in a position to actually try it out, because I was like, what was I doing? I was working as a teacher and I was in grad school, and I was like, wow, this is too much. So I shelved that idea. And then when I was ready, I just searched online for like Sacramento roller derby, and then I found Sac City Rollers and went to their new skater program, and here I am today.
How big is Sacramento Derby?
Good question. I'd say we have maybe 80 active adult skaters, but we also have a really big junior program. We have an A and B team with our juniors and like a pretty full class of like new junior skaters. So there's probably almost as many junior skaters as adult skaters in Sacramento.
And what does that translate in terms of, that's awesome. And what does that translate to in terms of like intra-league teams or charter teams and travel teams? How many do y'all have of those?
So we have our charter, of course, and we have a B team and our C team for the adults. And we sort of, when last year was our first year of Sacramento roller derby, and because we had a lot of people, we also had like upper level B teams. So if we were playing like Angel City's B team, we'd send like the mixed A-B team. So we have 3.5-ish teams, and we also have 3 home teams when we play ourselves. So that's a lot of fun too. And this was the first time I'd done home teams because with Sac City Rollers, they didn't have home teams when I started there. So that's pretty fun.
That's great. And what are you on?
I'm on Sacramento's B team. And I'm also the captain of one of our home teams, Team Blue Steel. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
How well known is roller derby and the world derby and like skating in Sacramento, would you say?
It's hard to say. I feel like a lot of people have heard of us, but that doesn't necessarily translate into like support. We do have more than one roller rink in Sacramento, so like there's definitely a wider skating scene than just roller derby. So
there's a market.
We have the opportunity for more outreach, definitely, but I don't know. We just haven't found the right angle, or we don't know the right people. I'm not sure, but we can get pretty decent crowd at our games.
Thank you again for coming on. I've been wanting to like do an episode about like books and literature and reading and all that sort of thing. And, you know, how to make it sort of apply with Derby was kind of like that missing sort of piece. And then, I don't know, out of nowhere, it kind of just clicked. I was like, I got to reach out to Rosetta and I want to talk to her. This would be perfect because like I told you, I think that you're like the biggest bibliophile that I follow that are skaters. And I love that about you. I love that. I love that you document the books that you've taken out of the library or the books that you're reading and that you are just, I don't know, you can really tell that it's definitely a love of yours. My question to you is, well, first of all, how many books did you read this year?
So as I mentioned to you before we started, I write a list every year of the books I read. And I've been doing this. I started when I was in college, partly just kind of out of curiosity and like, where does my time go? So on my blog, you can actually see all my book lists. But so far this year, I have read 63 books.
Hold up. Wait. So what sign are you, by the way?
What sign am I?
Yes.
Like my zodiac?
Yes.
Taurus.
Because that sounds like some Virgo behavior. Let me tell you. Like, that really appeals to the Virgo in me. Like the list making and the documentation.
Like, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I was like, oh, that's. I have several ongoing consecutive lists of books. You know, books that I've completed, books that I want to buy. Like I have a wish list and I have a library hold list, and so they all kind of inform.
Oh yeah, my hold list is out of control. They're probably all going to come in at the same time too.
Isn't that the worst? I never know how to manage that. I have another list on the books app on like Libby is the app that the New York Public Library uses.
Oh yeah, like the Overdrive one.
Yes, and so all of the audiobooks come in at once. So because I sort of usually like walk to work, and it's like it's like it's too overwhelming.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's impossible.
It really is. And of course, I've started like 5 books at once. And, you know, and my biggest dilemma when I travel is which book to take with me. Oh my goodness. That's almost, that headache starts as soon as I buy my plane ticket. Let me tell you.
Well, that's why I love having an e-reader because like we just went on vacation to Peru, as I know you know, but I've got like hundreds of books with me, so I don't have to worry about it. I'm just like, well, if I finish this book, there's a whole bunch on here that I haven't read yet.
That is, see, I feel so, that's like you know how like right now on Twitter, the controversial opinions are making the rounds. That might be my controversial opinion. E-reader or no e-reader?
No e-reader. That's your controversial opinion.
Maybe no, because like on the one hand, like I feel like, especially when it's vacation, part of being on vacation to me is the luxury of having a book and like like tactile of a book, because I'm in grad school, right? So I do quite a bit of online reading as it is. So when I'm like off the clock, so to speak, I want to highlight and like bookmark but like, like actually do it, because I know that those are terms on e-readers too.
Right.
So anyway, but the convenience of it and the ability to have like a slew of other options with you is very, very tempting. The jury's still out.
I get a mix of ebooks and paper books, so it's not a big burden for me to be like, oh no, only ebooks on vacation, because I get plenty of paper books from the library too, which is partly motivated by the fact that I like to get out of the house and have an excuse to go to the library. So my thing lately is I love to ride my bike to the library, so I always try to make sure I have some physical books in my whole queue.
You warm weather people.
I do live in California, though.
So nice. I see everyone with their rollouts and their outdoorsiness this time of year, and I'm just so envious. I wish. Anyway, and for people who like maybe can't find time to read or have trouble finding time to read, when would you say that you do most of your reading for fun? Because I'm sure you do a lot of it for work too.
I do read a fair bit for work since I'm an editor. I don't know. I always like to read before bed, obviously, although that can be hard because if you're sleepy, you're not going to read that much. I think I like to read on my lunch break. That's a good time. Or I don't know, just literally any time. One thing I started doing, or I realized a while ago, is I was just frittering away tons of time on social media. And so I started being like, go do literally anything else. Like, so if I'm just like scrolling infinitely, I'm like, go read a book. Stop. There's nothing you need here, because it just, I don't know. I think it's mentally not good to get caught in the infinite scroll. So if I catch myself doing that, I'll go read or do something instead. So
that awareness is so good and so crucial.
Very hard to develop as well, but it makes a big difference.
I agree. So you mentioned your blog earlier. It's called Digital Manticore. What does Digital Manticore mean, and how did it get started?
I think I actually started that blog name in a class I was taking. I was doing my master's degree in library and information science, and I took a couple classes like making websites. And so in one of the classes I had to make a website, so I was like, I don't know, Digital Manticore. And because manticores are kind of a funny mythical animal and they eat people. And I was like, well, this is online, so it's a digital manticore. And then I just put the tagline of eating up information, because it's kind of what I do.
I'm kind of sad that blogs are not as prevalent as they used to be, including myself. I used to have one and I just kind of like tapered off, but so it goes.
This year I started blogging more because I've had the blog for a while, but I don't really post that much. And then I think in the summer I decided I would just do a weekly like write-up of my life. And I wish more people did blogging instead of just like firing off half-cocked thoughts into Twitter or whatever.
And I also don't know I don't appreciate you attacking me on my own podcast. Okay.
How dare I come into your podcast?
How dare you? Blocked and reported. Attacked. Seen. I'm kidding.
It was a good chat while it lasted.
I know. And that was Rosetta Stone. Thank you, everyone.
You did what you had to do.
I know. That's that. Anyway, no. So, okay, moving on to the matter at hand. Your top 5 books of 2019, what would they be?
This is a hard question, but I did plan ahead. So I think one of my favorite books so far, this is a nonfiction book, is Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. And I know you also wanted to bring books back to roller derby a little bit, so I think this one we can do it. So the author, she basically says there's a huge gap in data available about women in the world. So like, and she has just tons and tons of examples. So cars are an example. Those crash test dummies are man-sized, or even if they're smaller for women, they don't have breasts, you know? So women are way more likely to die in a car accident because cars aren't designed for women, and the seatbelt will choke you. And it's pretty horrifying. So the whole book is this kind of information about like the world is designed for men, and what the fuck.
Yeah. And who is that author?
And when you look at it, her name is Caroline Criado Perez.
Cool.
And you can follow her on Twitter too. And she also does a big chapter about like bathrooms and how, you know, the women's restroom line is always twice as long because we allocate the same amount of bathroom space to men and women, even though we know women need more time in the bathroom. So it's just a really good book for making you aware of like all the little inequalities that we're dealing with constantly that are making us tired and in many cases literally unsafe. So that, I mean, it's kind of painful to read just because you're like, wow, life is awful in some ways, but it's really good information. And I think to bring it back to roller derby, like to be in a women's sport and in a community of women, it's really valuable to be aware of like, you know, what kind of stuff we need to overcome and like how we can, what we need to do to support each other more effectively and basically get each other through existence.
You know, I read it's a book called Playing While White, and here's this whole book about like white privilege in sports, and only one chapter out of like maybe 12 was about women's sports. And the whole tenor of the chapter was about how basically any kind of like sports media or even studies of sports media that exist are so scant in comparison to men's sports and men's sports coverage. And part of it was not only because of just the assumption that women wouldn't be sports consumers, or players, athletes, but that, you know, that's women's sports was kind of developed for the white male cis heterosexual gaze. That's so interesting. It's interesting, but also unsurprising that exists in other facets of life, and basically probably all facets of life.
Yeah, I mean, that book doesn't even look at the angle of like women of color very much, but I mean, it's kind of implied with some of it. So yeah, being a woman in the world is difficult, and that book takes us through it. Okay, what else did I read that was good? So another nonfiction book I really enjoyed in terms of like a book that stayed with me is called Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. And it is by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And so the author is an Indigenous woman and an ecologist. And it's kind of like a memoir, kind of like an essay collection. And she talks about sort of indigenous views on plants and the environment and how we can respect nature and each other. And it sounds a little corny to describe it, I guess, but just the concept stayed with me. And she has this concept she calls the honorable harvest, where it's like you don't take the first thing you see, you always leave some for whoever comes after you. You respectfully use whatever you take from nature. And I've been feeling a lot of like climate anxiety lately. So it was really powerful to me to read, like, you know, how can we move through the world in a more respectful way, both of the environment and of each other.
How do you think that would transfer or translate into derby?
We could definitely think more about how, as like leagues or as communities, we integrate with what's around us and our, you know, community that's already there. I know in Sacramento we are a nonprofit, so we emphasize, you know, helping our community and supporting our community. So something I'm curious about is like, you know, what more could we do for the indigenous people of our area? And, you know, that's obviously a very big and difficult question. And, you know, what could we do for our environment, and how can we as skaters maybe have less of an impact? And that might be things like sharing used gear and not just buying more wheels because you can buy more wheels, you know, like really thinking about the impact of your choices.
And also, I'm assuming, I haven't read the book, but also just what kind of world and planet and sport we're leaving for junior derby players that'll hopefully continue on in the sport, right? And future derby players too.
Yeah, like what are you leaving for the people who come after you? And that's something I try to think about a lot when I'm helping new announcers or coaching. Like, am I leaving something worthwhile for whoever is here after me?
Nice. Thank you. Okay. Book number 3.
Book number 3. Let's see. One book, I guess a novel I really liked this book is called Semiosis, and the author is Sue Burke. This is a science fiction novel. It's like a first contact kind of story. So there's people from Earth who go to another planet, but the planet has sentient plants, which is kind of a weird concept. I don't think I've seen that in science fiction before. And so the colonists there basically end up in a symbiotic relationship with this sentient plant. I don't know. It's just again, so hard to describe books in a way that is compelling.
All good.
But it's just an interesting concept, and I love science fiction. And it was kind of a different sort of first contact kind of story. So that's one I recommend.
Sweet.
So book number 4. Another novel I really like this year is called This Is How You Lose the Time War. It's by 2 authors, Amal Mukhtar and Max Gladstone. And so this book is written as a series of letters between 2 spies who are on opposite sides of the Time War. And even though they're enemy operatives, they start leaving each other like these coded message hidden throughout the timeline. And it's just a really cool, it's basically a time traveling lesbians love story, which, so hot
Who
right
doesn't
now,
love that? Say no more. Sold.
Say no more. Time traveling lesbians is 2019's best genre.
You heard it here first.
So that was a really cool one, just in terms of the creativity of like how they were sending messages to each other through time. Like they're leaving coded messages in tree rings, and they're like cultivating the tree as it grows up. Just like weird ideas like that. And I love seeing, novel concepts in fiction. That's one of the best things about it. So that's why I like that one.
Cool. And so does it start out in the present or in the future?
I think it's just one of those books that spans like all eras at once. It's like alternate timeline kind of thing. So it just starts when it starts. It's not really, they describe the characters as like moving backwards and forwards through time. So it's not really about like when they are necessarily. It's more just like where they are in relationship to each other.
And last but not least, also, are you ranking these, or are these like just your 5?
No.
Okay.
Just 5. It's hard to put books in an order like that because you can't really compare in a way.
Well, the way that I do it is their like impact on me, right? Like how profound of a reaction they elicit. But no, I agree. It's hard to compare 2 books side to side on their content.
Totally. So my 5th pick is, it's called The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls, and is by Mona El-Tahawi, and she's a feminist. So she organized, it's a book about feminist activism, basically, and she organizes it into the 7 sins, in quotes, that women and girls should be committing to rage against the patriarchy, basically.
That's great.
And it's really powerfully written. It's really strong, and it's just such a good read. And I actually got one of my male coworkers to read it because he has a daughter, and I had mentioned it, and he told me he read it, and he's like, it's very hard to read as a man. And I'm like, good. You should be challenged. But one of the best things that stayed with me from the book is the author, she writes about all the violence that men commit against women. And she says, what if women started fighting back? And what if there was a group of women and they said, we're going to kill 5 men every day until the violence stopped? And then they just kept increasing it. And how many men would we have to kill every day before men as a group were like, okay, we'll stop killing women? What would it take to make that violence stop? And I thought that was a really powerful question because it's not academic. Women.
Yeah, we just take it for granted.
Just women die every day at the hands of men, and we're like, well, what are you going to do? So to reverse that question and be like, what if we killed men?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, make a good point. So that was a really powerful book.
I really like that list. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Was that like 3 nonfiction and 2 fiction that you gave me?
Yeah, I think so. I think the nonfiction books kind of stay with me more than fiction books, even though I probably read more fiction than nonfiction. But, sometimes the ideas you get from a nonfiction book just sit with you more.
I feel like they go to different places, The nonfiction books seem to stay more front of mind, whereas the fiction ones you kind of just like totally absorb,
Yeah.
And
it's like the fiction is here for your emotions in a way to just kind of feel something, but the nonfiction, like you're right.
Yeah. No. Well, and especially, I don't know about you, but for me, I tend to gravitate to books that are more sort of performance development, if that makes sense, or like personal development. That's such a loaded term, but
it's okay.
Yeah, no, but I again, it might just be the Virgo in me, but I'm always like interested in best practices, to say something, to like put it some way, be it personally or societally, and just approach a nonfiction book differently too.
Yeah, I do think, even if a book doesn't like have best practices for us, like if you're reading and you're not kind of taking something away from it, either you're rethinking something or it makes you want to do something, like,
sure,
I don't want to say you're doing it wrong. That's a little stronger of an opinion than I want to express, but like, books should make you want to do something different if they're good books.
If there was like the reading equivalent to being a messy eater, that'd be me. I'm just kind of like, I have an audiobook, I have a school book, I have a personal book that I'm reading. So I'm kind of all over the place. But on the other hand, I like that. I feel like it's also almost like your brain is engaging in conversation and dialogue with the book. So.
Yeah.
So I read, my top book of the year was probably The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. And it's about just radical body acceptance and body love, and just how, again, you might not, a book, sometimes you'll need a book to help you rethink the way that society's conditioned you to feel one way about yourself or about the way that you look at things, in order to like kind of address those processes. And so it was a very uplifting book.
That sounds interesting.
It's great. And then there's Stacey Abrams's like memoir, and it was just
cool.
It was, but she's changed the title since, like in the second, edition of it, they changed the title. And I know this because I accidentally bought it thinking that it was a new book from her. And then I opened it and I'm like, this sounds really familiar. Like, I have to return it. It's like, I'm good. So, but it's just basically her rise and her story from being a, poor Black woman, and just growing up in Mississippi and being incredibly intelligent, but also having to deal with vestiges of poverty and oppression, and
right. It's got to be so hard.
But she's so
hard to be a white woman. It's so hard to be a Black woman, and
and it's just like people just underestimating what you're capable of or how you approach things, and so it was written so well, and it was just it was like a conversation with her, and I really enjoyed it. That's definitely a subgenre of nonfiction that I love. It's just like biographies and autobiographies, that especially people that like you notice them from afar, but you always wonder about their lives and how they came to be. So that was really cool.
Well, you're just very, like, I can tell you're just someone who's interested in people. So it makes complete sense to me.
Yes.
That would be your genre.
For sure. And then The Body Keeps Score, which I'll confess that I haven't completely finished, but so far it like knocked me off my seat. It's a book about the way that the brain and the body react to trauma. And I was going to say process, but it's quite the opposite. Actually, the brain doesn't really process trauma, and it keeps it stored. And the effects of it has really it's been really interesting to read about it. I feel it's when you're someone that has like mental health issues or has experienced trauma, you kind of just go from your condition and your experience and don't really understand the medical explanation for things. And so to be able to read this book,
not outside of it.
Exactly. And to have like the context for it and to understand, for instance, when I had like therapy sessions, I'd kind of be like, so my therapist would be so fun. I'd be like, how are you going to document this session? Like, what are your notes going to be like? And that sounds really paranoid, but it's not what I meant as like someone who was like also like a social worker. Like, I'm just intrigued to be like, to kind of know like how someone else would record and chronicle this. Exactly. Right. So it's just like having that sort of aspect of it. It's infinitely interesting to me. I think I gave you 3 titles. Making Ideas Happen. And the book is about how to, I'm a person that has like a zillion and one ideas, but has has a challenge to like actually make them and keep them and sort of like nurture them into fruition.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to have ideas. It's hard to act on ideas. So
right. And
completely understandable.
Yeah. And I'm also a person that just is very much in my head. So taking it out of my head and putting it into like there's something that I have just in general, because I'm always like thinking about the processes behind it. Right. So Making Ideas Happen was really helpful and really instrumental in actually making this podcast happen. So it's
a big deal.
Yeah, it's a great book. So I enjoyed that book. And I don't know. I don't think I have a last one.
4 is a good number.
4 is a good number. 4 is a good round number. Anyway, one last question before we wrap up. You have Asperger's, which is, as you were explaining to me earlier, disorder within the autism spectrum. Is that
right? And
so I wanted to ask you about being on the spectrum or having Asperger's and how you've experienced Derby with autism, because I feel like I know of a few people who have autism and play Derby. And so it's like just kind of another curiosity that I've had. So if you don't mind me asking you.
I definitely don't mind. I like to talk about it because when we think of like a person with autism, we always think about children and we usually think about boys. So to be an adult with autism and a woman, I think it's important to like say, yeah, I have autism. We are here. It doesn't magically go away once you hit adulthood or something.
Were you a child when you were diagnosed, or was it more recently?
Actually, no, I was an adult, and it's kind of funny because I was getting my teaching credential and I was a student teacher, and my mentor teacher, her name is Shannon Questionberry, and we're still friends, was actually in the process of getting her daughter assessed for autism. So like a week into being in her classroom, she's like, hey, can I ask you a couple questions? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, do you feel like you're, watching your life like a movie in the third person? And I was like, maybe. And she like hit me with a couple of these diagnostic questions. And I was just like, what? She's like, I think you have Asperger's. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. But then I went home and I read up on it and I was like, oh my God, I think I do have autism. And it just is one of those things where once I learned about it, I was like, this makes a lot of sense and I was in my early 20s, and for reference, I'm 33 now, so not that long ago, really. But especially when I was in college, I just thought I was like weird or crazy, maybe. My connection to the world is, I don't know, felt tenuous sometimes. And so to understand like, oh, this is a documented thing, this is what I have, it really helped me kind of situate myself in the world and be a lot more confident. I mean, not that I was unconfident before, but now I'm kind of obnoxiously confident. So after that, about a year or two later, I ended up going to a doctor who's an expert in autism to see about a formal diagnosis. So she talked to me for a couple hours, and she also called my parents because autism is considered a developmental disability. So she wanted to hear about my childhood. And then she's like, yeah, you have Asperger's. And she also diagnosed me with anxiety, which was very good to know as well, because with autism, it's hard to read other people and their intentions. So it's like you're moving through the world not knowing what to expect, which can lead to anxiety. So I know before you were also asking about kind of like Asperger's and autism. What's the difference?
Please.
I can go.
Yes.
So currently, Asperger's doesn't technically exist according to the DSM anymore. It's all autism spectrum disorder. But, I mean, Asperger's still exists in terms of like a constellation of, traits or symptoms. So it was first observed during World War II. There was a doctor, I think, named Hans Asperger in Vienna or somewhere, and he had a clinic, and a lot of boys with this set of traits were coming to him where they're like very intelligent, hyper focused on certain things, but like low social skills, kind of need guidance on that day-to-day, how to live stuff. And they were often described as like being a little professor, like when you have a kid who seems way too smart and wants to talk to the adults. So it started out as diagnosis just for boys because patriarchy, but eventually kind of got expanded into women, of course, because women do have autism. So it's one aspect of autism where, in contrast to, some people with autism can be totally nonverbal or like limited verbal skills. People with Asperger's more likely to be hyperverbal, might learn to read early, and tend to have really focused interests. And then, of course, they have traits there's Asperger's has traits in common with the rest of autism spectrum disorder, which includes like usually sensitivity to the environment. So everyone is a little different. Like you might have a hard time with loud noises or crowds or certain textures. Like for me, there are some food textures that I just won't eat. Like I hate slimy kind of foods. Or my husband, Mr. Stone, who doesn't formally have autism, like he cannot stand crowds or really loud noises hurt his ears, which I know loud noises hurt everyone's ears, but his threshold is a lot different. So stuff like that.
Thank you. And as you were talking and you're giving your explanation, we kind of went full circle because, invisible women and how the symptoms were first identified for men and then women. Anyhow, as a derby athlete and as a skater, were you always athletic, or was skating your first?
I don't think of myself as always being athletic, but I did do active stuff when I was growing up. I didn't really play sports. I played soccer one year when I was in kindergarten, and I hated it. And my parents would be on the sidelines like, run, you have to run. So that makes me laugh to this day, as you can see. But what I did do growing up is my hometown of Redlands, California, has a youth and community circus that runs through the YMCA. So like some kids play sports after school. I went to circus after school, and I was unicyclist and juggled and did acrobatics and stuff like that.
How could I forget? That was another thing that I was like super uber impressed about you. It's like, you're so amazing. So cool.
Yeah, I think you probably, I don't know if I saw you at the Rydell Ball or roller call or not, but I actually brought my unicycle this year because the theme of the Rydell party was circus. And I was like, well, this is my moment. So I literally brought my unicycle.
You gotta love RollerCon. Yeah.
I know.
Packing a unicycle and skates and what have you.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So this is my first like competitive sport, so that's different for me. And it's the last couple of years, it's been a really like a paradigm shift for me in terms of thinking of myself as an athlete. And in terms of like autism, I think for me, it's been very hard to develop like a sense of body. I guess proprioception is the technical term, where like you know where you are in space and understand what your body is doing. So for a long time, I just kind of considered myself an intellectual, like, oh, my pursuits are in my brain, but your brain is part of your body. Fun fact. So with derby, for me, it's a little hard to like know where I am sometimes. It's like, get to the line, and I'm like, am I not I not there? What am I doing? Like, sometimes it's really hard to just know what my body is doing. And it's usually like if we learn a new drill or we're doing a new drill or trying something new, I usually have to watch a few times because I'll hear the explanation and it doesn't necessarily connect for me. So it's a little tricky to learn new skills. And I'm also very literal. So sometimes if I get frustrated at practice if a coach is giving shitty directions. Because I'm literally, and also my day job, as I said, I'm an editor and a technical writer, so I think a lot about how to communicate effectively and like how to explain how to do stuff. And
so you're super mindful of that.
Yeah, and so if I get to
practice.
Yeah, and so sometimes in practice, the coach is like, "Here's what we're gonna do," and I'm like, "To what end? Like, what do you want us to get out of this? Like, what specifically do you want me to do?" Like, I'll get kind of salty with coaches sometimes, but they're like, not to be too much of a dick, but sometimes, you have a male coach who doesn't actually skate, and they'll be telling you things like, "You need to get to the line faster," and so then I'll be like, "How do you want me to do that?"
Shall I fly? Shall I?
Yeah, what do you want? So I think that is a little bit of an autism behavior, but probably just a little bit of my personality.
Do you find that Derby's sufficiently accessible for you and your needs? And I don't want to make you the spokesperson in all capital letters of autism.
No, it's okay. I think for me it is, but I'm also, pretty, I guess high functioning is the term, even though I don't
Everyone's
know that I like that term.
Too, right?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's different. Well, it can be hard. Long events are hard for me. So like if I go to a tournament, so far I've really only been to tournaments to announce. I always make sure to get my own room my own hotel room, because after being at the venue all day, I just like really need nobody to look at or talk to me for a little while, just because it's a lot to take in. And events are very loud, but you can wear headphones and stuff like that. But accessibility, I don't know. It's hard to say because it is, autism's a little bit different for everyone. And I could definitely see, like, there are probably some autistic people who would never consider playing roller derby because it's like a lot of touching and sweating. And, it depends on your brand of autism, I think. Mm-hmm. But as with most disabilities, I think the stuff that helps people with autism helps everybody, like giving clear instructions and explaining a little bit of like what you want skaters to get out of certain drills, or things that are usually hard for people with autism are like when there's a system but it's hidden. So I know one example that's come up at RollerCon is people being like, when you're there and there are all the challenge games, some people know that you can go talk to the captain before a game and say, "Hey, are there any open spots on your roster?" But if you didn't know that system existed, or you're like not comfortable just like walking up and being like, "Hey, put me in your game," that's the kind of thing that could be a barrier. Anytime it's like low context, I think it's hard for people with autism.
That makes sense. I never even thought of that.
My self-care tip is to get off the internet, which I kind of said earlier, but I think for me, anytime I'm like making something or doing something in the physical world, like that's a really good form of self-care. And I think that's why, as you've seen on my Instagram, I bake a lot, or I like to cook food, just kind of like to reconnect yourself with the earth instead of like getting mad about people yelling on Twitter, which again, I know it sounds like I'm personally calling you out, but I'm actually talking about myself.
And now you're reading my thoughts. How dare you? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I'm a mess. I'm pretty rude that way. So my self-care is just do something that has like a physical result in the world. So, make food or gardening or take a walk or pet your cat. I think that it really helps to like ground yourself. So that's my self-care advice. And for MVPs, I have 2 MVPs because I gotta be extra. So at the time of this recording, it's Thanksgiving this week. So one thing I've started making a tradition for me as of last year anyway is to make a donation to groups that promote indigenous food sovereignty and like indigenous foodways, because I like Thanksgiving because I like cooking and eating, but I also recognize like it is a result of colonialism and that our indigenous people don't really appreciate Thanksgiving. So this year I'm going to be donating to the North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems, which promotes indigenous foodways and education for indigenous people. So that's one MVP. And my other MVP is Derby Twitter. Even though I said get off Twitter, I love the conversations that happen there, and it's fun to like connect with everyone all over the Derby world and just be able to chat with people. I think that's really awesome. So those are my MVPs: the National or North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems and # Derby Twitter.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
When you're one of the highlights of Derby Twitter, you make it what it is. A great,
thank you.
Colorful place.
You are too. You tweet all the time, and you have such good things to say.
Thanks.
And you're saying important stuff.
I will heed your call though to get off internet, because I could definitely benefit from your advice for sure. Next time I'm gonna maybe make this on a loop and put it on my phone.
Rosetta Stone tells you to get off Twitter for
get off. Stop mindless scrolling. Nothing is going to come of it. All right, folks, well, there you have it. Holding Space with Magical Realism is available on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, and YouTube. Help the pod grow by subscribing and sharing it with friends. Rating and reviewing on Apple Podcasts also helps others find us. Follow the pod on Instagram at Holding Space with Magic Pod. Intro and outro music is by Sun Searcher. The song is called Latin Rhythm, and the cover photo is by James Corbett of Epic Life Images. Find him at Epic Life Images on Instagram. See you next time. Bye.